My name's Jade. So I'm going to be starting off the webinar with a demonstration of using the Seed portal. Then I'll hand over to Cerin for the second half. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that I'm zooming in here from Gadigal country and pay my respects to the elders past and present. And I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to whatever country you are zooming in from today. I know we've got people from all over the place joining us, which is wonderful. We're all here today because we care about koalas, and the topic of today is data. So I'm talking about the Seed portal, and I just first of all want to quickly talk about very, very briefly what it is and why we're talking about it today. So the Seed is a portal for viewing bionet data, and this is New South Wales government data. And I know a lot of you know that it's not perfect, it's not necessarily fully complete, and it's not a perfect data set. However, the power in using government data is that it's held in high regard by the government. It's hard for them to ignore their own information. It is intended as an important resource to help decision makers make koala conservation decisions. So if we can get that information in front of decision makers, it's even harder for them to ignore. The other reason that we're using it is because you don't need any fancy tools or specialist software. It is available on the web. So you literally just need a computer and an internet connection and some guidance on how to use it, which is what we are hoping to provide to you today. So I'm just going to share my screen. This is what we're doing today. So first of all, how do you get to the Seed portal? As I said, it's a web-based, it's on the web and it's freely available. You do not need a login, and it is best to do it on a computer. Mobile phones can be just a bit small and fiddly for it. So you simply go to this website here, www.seed.newsouthwales.gov.au. This link will be in the follow-up resources. And then you click at the top, you click Seed Map. That opens a page that looks like this. You can see the whole of New South Wales, and you've got the map there. So you start with this big blue button here, and then you click on that and it opens up a drop-down menu. I know this looks overwhelming. We're just going to be looking at 4 of these sections today. So we have the layer catalog is where you would add data onto the map. So that's your koala sightings, the habitat layer, and then other layers that you want to add. Here is where you can add a development lot boundary. This I find really useful because often we're concerned about a development that might be threatening koala habitat. This tool lets you put the lot directly onto the map, and especially when they're awkward shapes, it's just really helpful. You can add an address, so this just puts a pinpoint at a particular street address, or you can add an LGA or a suburb boundary here. There's lots and lots of other stuff you can do, but for now we're just gonna stick with some simple things. So I'm just gonna come out of this for now. And now I'm going to actually just open Seed. So I just go into my search bar and type Seed. And it's the New South Wales, it says homepage, Seed portal, the New South Wales government website. And I'm going to make this full screen. And yeah, we get that open page there. So again, you go up to the top, this top bar here, and the second button says Seed Map. Click on it. SEED stands for Sharing and Enabling Environmental Data. And you'll get something like this open up. So I'm going to first of all show you how to add a location. Some of the data layers, like the habitat map, are really thick, as in they cover a lot of the map. So it can be difficult to orientate yourself once those are already on. So I like to put my location on first, get myself orientated with the lot or the LGA that I'm looking at, and then start adding data on top of that. So I start here. I start at my I want to button and click it. And the first thing I'm going to show you how to do is add a development lot. That's what we'll be doing quite often when you're concerned about a development. You want to see if it's got koala sightings or other species sightings. So you click search by lot, section DP. This opens this box in the middle. Now you have to put the DP number in first before it'll let you put a lot number in. You can find these numbers on the development application itself. Usually somewhere near the start, it'll say this development application relates to these lots and list a bunch of different lots. So it'll usually say lot 1, DP, and then a bunch of numbers. So you put those numbers in. I'm using here Gilead stage 2 as an example. So I'm going to search for that first lot number. So you can see when I hover over the DP number here, the lot appears on my map. It's bright blue and it disappears when I'm not hovering over it. This just means it's selected, but it's not yet being drawn onto my map. So if I was to go and put another DP number on there, this one would disappear. So what I need to do is draw it onto the map. So I simply go to the DP number, click these 3 dots. This opens this drop-down menu and click copy to drawing layer. So I go to the DP, the 3 dots at the side, copy to drawing layer. You can see it's changed color. So now this is on my map. I can go ahead and add the others. Gilead stage 2 is actually made up of 6 lots. I'm just going to show a few of them so we don't take too much time. So again, you go to I want to, search by lot, type in your DP number. It'll come up in a drop down. You can select it. And now I'm going to put lot 2 and search. So again, it's highlighted. I now need to copy it to my drawing layer so that I can add more. So I click the 3 dots, copy to drawing layer. I'll just show you one more. I want to search by lot. I put in my DP number. And select the lot number, click search, and again, it's highlighted. Again, I just press the 3 dots next to the DP number and copy to the drawing layer. Okay, you would just keep going like that until all the relevant lots are on your map. So the second way you might add a location is you might want to add an address, just a pinpoint at an address. This is really simple. You go, I want to find an address. And then you have to start with the suburb. Again, it won't let you pick a street name or a number until you've put your suburb in. So we're just going to go Rosemeadow. I've just picked, this is actually just the address where we had our first citizen science training day. So I had it in my maps already. So I just used that one. So you put in your suburb, street name, and number, click search. And there's a yellow and pink dot. Again, this will disappear if I put in another element. So if I want to keep it, I click the 3 dots and copy to the drawing layer. So the other thing you might want to do in terms of locations is put an LGA or a suburb boundary on the map. So to do this, you click I want to, search for a location. So you're using this one this time. and you get this search bar in the top left. So you just type in the name of your suburb or your LGA. I'm going to use Campbelltown as an example because Campbelltown is a suburb and an LGA. So you see we've got two results come up. If I'm interested in the LGA, I click on the LGA and it highlights. It's obviously, I can't see it all because it's too big. So I can just use these plus minus arrows. I can just zoom out until I can see the whole thing. And I can navigate the same way I would on Google Maps. Click and drag to reposition. So the whole of Campbelltown LGA is highlighted. It's bright pink. Again, it's it's selected. If I want to keep it and add other things, I can click the three dots and copy to drawing layer. So it's still pink because it's still being selected. So I'm just going to delete this and it will keep the drawing layer. So it's still pink. That means it's selected on the map, but I only want to keep the drawing, not the selection. So I'm just clicking the three dots and going remove from results. Okay, now we can see all of our different things. We've got Gilead stage 2 down here. We've got a street address and we've got Campbelltown LGA. You normally wouldn't look at all these things at once. I'm just giving you examples of what you can do. So if you put something on the map and then you decide, oh, actually, I don't want that. It's really simple to take stuff off. You click on whatever you want to remove and you can see it's highlighted with all these dots. And then you just click delete. So we're just going to focus on Gilead because it's a little bit clearer when we're zoomed in. So now we've got our location. I'm going to show you how to add some data. So first of all, you might want to see, have there been any koalas spotted in this, where this development is going to go? So you click, again, you start with the I want to, and this time we're going into the layer catalog. This is how we add or remove information from the map. We click it and we get this box. There's a lot in here. This will all be in the handout, so I don't expect you to remember where everything is. We go to Office of Environment and Heritage and scroll down until we see Koala Habitat Information Base. These are all the different koala things you can add. We're going to start with the koala sightings. So we click there. And then the blue tick means it's going to show up on your map. So we just click OK. All right, so we've got all these little squares have shown up on the map. Now, they don't really mean anything if you don't have a legend to tell you what they mean. So on this left-hand bottom corner, it says legend. You can click there. And it says there's nothing to display. For some reason, and I have no idea why, if anyone can tell me why this happens, I would love to hear it. Whenever you add a new layer, there's no legend until you move the map. So if I zoom out and zoom in again, the legend appears. It just seems to be a random glitch. Anyway, now that you've got your legend, you can see the different colors are koala sightings from different years. So you can see that this bright cyan one here is from this year. And the other blue ones are from the other recent years. You can click on any data point and it will bring up more information about it, including which year it was observed. So this was a scat that was seen in 2021. And you just close that again. So that's how you would put koala species sightings on the map. If you wanted to then add the koala habitat layer, you go back into that koala habitat information base. So again, you go to I want to, layer catalog, Office of Environment and Heritage, scroll down until you see the koala habitat information base. And this time we're going to pick koala habitat suitability models. We just select all. This layer has been split into different sections for the different areas of New South Wales. But if you just select all, they will all come on, so your area will be covered. So there's the habitat layer. I will say this is a modeling layer. So that means it's not necessarily ground truthed. And we're not saying that it's perfect, but we are saying that we're advocating for the fact that it should be used at least as a precautionary principle. So if something on here that's labeled as high probability of being, high suitability of being koala habitat is being threatened, it should be protected if there's not other fine scale mapping in place already. So you can see now that we've got the different colors. So the dark blue is the most likely to be koala habitat. And you can see there's habitat here and all through this, potential development. You can see that the koala sightings are hard to see underneath the habitat. So you might want to put them in the other orientation. You might want to put the species sightings on top of the habitat layer. This is easy to do. You go up to the top here where there's these lines and you click that and you say change layer drawing order. So I'm just going to show that again. This top lines here, click that. The drop down appears, change layer drawing order. Under service layers, you'll find you can see the koala species sightings are underneath koala habitat. So we're going to click koala species and press the up arrow, and now they pop out on top. So again, if I press koala species and the down arrow, they're back underneath. You can't see them. And click it, or you can do it the other way. You can click the habitat layer and bring it down. So now we can see this is immediately telling us that Gilead has recent koala sightings inside the development area. So that would be something that would be it's very concerning, and we'd want to get that in front of as many decision makers as possible. Before we we do that, we want to go back to, before you take a screenshot to save the information on your screen, you want to just double check that your legend is visible, because again, if you're just showing colors on a map, it doesn't mean anything unless it's explained what it means. So you want to make sure this legend is visible, and then you can capture your screen by taking a screenshot. On a Mac, you press Shift Command 3, and if you're on a PC, you press Windows and the print screen button, and that should save a screenshot to your screenshots folder. On a Mac, they tend to save to your desktop. So that's that would be how you would look at habitat and sightings. It is also useful just to sometimes zoom in and zoom out. So obviously zoomed in, you can see that there's koala sightings inside the development, but also if we zoom out, it sort of gives you a kind of wider view, and you can see that, you know, there's the Georges River and the Nepean River running down either side of this development, and you can see there are koalas and habitat running through it. You can just imagine if that gets developed, that the koalas are going to have a really hard time getting between those two rivers. So yeah, zooming in and out can help you view the development in the context, in the wider context. So I just want to show you one other layer while we're here, a layer that I really like. So we're going to go back into the layer catalog. Office of Environment and Heritage. We're going to quickly go back to the koala habitat information base. And I'll just tell you about the other layers in there. There's the areas of regional koala significance and the priority populations for New South Wales koala strategy. These are areas that the government has deemed important for koalas. So if you have concerns about something happening to koalas and you view these layers and you see that that development is going to happen within a priority population, that's something you can tell the decision makers, you know, this is in an area that the government has deemed important for koalas. The koala tree index layer is similar to the habitat layer. It's a modeling layer and it tells you the probability of finding a koala tree in that area. The New South Wales vegetation extent is tells you where there's native vegetation. So it shows you vegetation coverage. And this layer I tend not to use very much. I don't find it that useful. It's a grid. And it's just not that visual for this purpose. So I'm going to show you, we've got the species sightings selected. So if I want to turn those off, I open it and I just uncheck the button. And I'm going to untick the koala habitat suitability as well. That's how you turn the layers back off. So if I click OK, you can see there's now nothing on the map again. Before I finish, there's one other layer I want to show you. So I go back to the layer catalog, Office of Environment and Heritage, and just below the koala habitat information base, 2 below it is BioNet species sightings. This layer shows you all species sightings in BioNet for flora and fauna. So it's not a complete list of all the species that exist because it's just the ones that have been reported. But the good thing about it is it color codes them for their vulnerability status. Now, this layer only works when you're zoomed into a specific level. So if it doesn't come up, try zooming in and it should appear. So there you go. If you zoom it out too much, it just doesn't show. It needs to be zoomed in. So this is a good way of, if you're wanting to see what other endangered animals might be in an area that's threatened, because we know we all care about koalas, but it's not just koalas. They share their habitat with other animals and plants, and some of those are also threatened. And again, you can just click on any of the dots. So if there's red ones, they're critically endangered, orange ones are endangered, yellow are vulnerable, black presumed extinct, and green are not listed as threatened. So if we just click an orange one, probably a koala. Yep, this one you can see is a koala. And it was, and it tells you it's endangered here. So that's just a quick way of having a look to see if there've been any other endangered things in your in the area. That's another thing you can put in a submission. So there's one other thing I just want to let you know, and that's that you can change how these look, because sometimes when you have the habitat layer, the blue gets kind of lost. So you can just click on them and then it will highlight, and you can go into styles. You can make just an outline so that there's no color in the middle, if that helps you see what you're trying to see. And then you can change the outline color and you can click done. So you can change them to however you want them to look, just to make it more visible. This one gets a bit lost on the green. So that's everything I wanted to show you about what you can do on here. And I think I'll now be handing over to Cerin. Unless, Stephanie, was there any questions that came up that you think are worth answering just now? Okay. So that's all from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Cerin, who's going to talk to us about evidence koala evidence in decision making. And I'd just like to, thank you, Cerin, for joining us.
Catherine's got a question, but she's on mute.
She's on mute.
Hi, Jade. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Of course.
Oh, hello. Is it okay to ask a question
Yeah, I'm struggling to hear you a little bit.
now?
Yeah, if you can ask it now, and then if it's quick, we can answer it. Otherwise, we can put it till the end.
Thank you. I'm just thinking about Heathcote Road. I'd like to get to be able to mark the animals that have been, the koalas that have been killed, and also the koalas that have been hit or injured, and the koalas that have just been observed. Is there a way of changing the colours for those records, and also searching for specific records of, say, kills versus just sightings using seed?
I don't think on here you can change the colours of the squares. Like the koala records are coloured by the year that they've gone in. So I don't believe you can do that. You can add points to the map, but I think that would just get messy. And in terms of filtering, I don't know. I don't think you can filter it if you access the data via a different method, but I don't think on Seed you can filter it. You can click on the dots and you can click additional information, and it sometimes gives you more information about that sighting. But I don't think you can specifically filter it to only show those things. It's quite basic in that sense.
Thank you, Jade.
No worries. All right, Cerin, take it away.
Right. Can you hear me, Jade?
Yeah.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. That was really fascinating, Jade. I've never had someone step me through it like that, and I actually found it really interesting. So thank you. If there's one person on the call that it was useful for, it was me. So hi, everyone. I'm Cerin. I'm with the Environmental Defenders Office, and I'm joining you today from beautiful Dharawal country on the south coast of New South Wales, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and anyone joining us on the call today, Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders. Jade's done a really good job at showing you how to use the Seed portal to find out, where koalas are, and it's mentioned several times, using that information for submission. So they've asked me along today to have a bit of a chat about what you can use, how you use koala evidence in decision-making processes. So just clicking through, just a bit of a disclaimer from me. Today, I'm just here to give some legal information. It's not legal advice, but luckily for you, if you do need legal advice, you can try and approach EDO directly. Our website is there on the screen, and we have a national advice line that you can call into as well. So if you've got any burning legal questions, I suggest going through that way today, and I'll stick to today talking about koala evidence in decision making. I've got a fact sheet that I've made available to the Sydney Basin Koala Network as well, that will have all this information in there, so you'll have it on hand as well, and I'm sure Jade will make that available as part of the resource package that you're going to get. Thumbs up. Thanks, Jade. So today I'm really talking about environment and planning decisions, which is a pretty broad topic. So I'm talking about things like a development proposal or an infrastructure proposal, a rezoning application, a decision by council to prepare a draft koala plan of management, or a policy decision that government or council might make, like a koala strategy or a regional plan. So there's lots of different decisions that can be made that will impact on koalas. The one thing I would probably say, and it's the important point, and it'll keep coming up again, is that there's no one process. So the requirements for decision making will be different depending on the type of decision that's being made, the legal process that needs to be followed, and the specific individual circumstances. So I'm going to try and talk generally to cover most scenarios, but just keep in mind that it will be slightly different, and you might just need to check the process depending on your individual circumstances. So do koalas need to be considered in decision making? My disclaimer, it depends on the individual circumstances. But for example, In some cases, the law might explicitly require that koalas be considered. So one example there is if you've got an application for Part 4 development under the Planning Act in New South Wales, then you need to consider the koala SEP, which is the state environmental planning policy for koalas. And it explicitly sets out how and what you need to consider in relation to koalas. In other cases, though, koalas might not be explicitly mentioned in the law, but they might fall within the scope of some of the other more broader things that decision makers need to consider, like the impacts on threatened species, or the principles of ecologically sustainable development, or the public interest. And I guess if we're talking, in terms of environment and planning law, then yes, generally koalas would fall either into one of those explicit requirements to consider koalas, or probably under one of those more general ones about impacts on threatened species, public interest, etc. But obviously, location is going to be relevant as well. If you're in a location where there's no koalas, then it's probably less likely that you'll need to consider the information about koalas then. So what evidence exactly needs to be considered? So we've figured out we probably need to consider the impacts on koalas, but what exactly do we need to look at? So again, it will depend on the specific individual circumstances, but in some cases, the rules may refer decision makers to specific information. And one example I've got here is in the case of a decision maker having to consider whether there's serious and irreversible impacts. And that's a requirement under the New South Wales Biodiversity Conservation Act. And the guidelines from government say that the decision maker should look at the threatened biodiversity data that's on BioNet. So in that specific example, it points the decision maker to certain data that it needs to look at. But in most other cases, the law is not specific about what information about koalas needs to be considered. And in these circumstances, information about koalas might be put before decision makers in a variety of ways, and the decision maker can, and in some cases may be compelled to consider that information in the decision-making process. So let's talk about some ways that the information can get before decision makers. So we've got things like agency briefs, and they're briefs that the department or the council might put before the decision maker, and then they might be general, so just a general brief up to the minister or the decision maker pertaining to an issue, or they might be specific to a decision, and in which case those briefs might be more likely to address the legal requirements, including any mandatory things that the decision maker needs to take into account, for an example, an assessment report or a formal submission, or any relevant standards like noise standards, for example. There's also assessment reports that normally accompany a proposal. You're probably familiar with environmental impact statements or biodiversity assessment reports or reviews of environmental factors. That's what I'm talking about here. And they're normally prepared by experts on behalf of the proponent and are likely to include information about koalas. Then we've got formal submissions and informal submissions. So a formal submission is one that's normally made through the legal process. So where the legal process requires the decision maker to consult with the public, and members of the community are invited to make a submission through that process. Normally there's no prescribed format for that, and you can put in your submission whatever information you like. And then you've got informal submissions, which fall outside of the legal process, but is another way you can write to the decision maker. So you can do that off your own back at any time. You can write to a decision maker or a politician and raise your own concerns. You can put in there whatever information you like. But the extent to which the decision maker is legally required to consider that information may be a bit more limited. However, if you put the information in front of the decision maker in this way, it'll make it harder for them to argue that they weren't aware of that information. And lastly, you've got expert evidence. So I've talked about experts preparing those assessment reports, but you could also commission your own expert to do a report for you or your local community group, putting in place their expert information, and you can put that to the decision maker through those formal submissions and informal submissions. And another way you can get expert evidence before a decision maker, maybe through the court process, where you've got legal proceedings on foot and you get an expert witness in your court proceedings. So just a few little tips about, including evidence in formal and informal submissions. So if you're making your own submission, you can use evidence, case studies, or stories, or whatever you like within your submission to support your arguments. It's a good idea to give specific examples that draw on your own knowledge and experience. So for example, you could say, I've lived in the area for 20 years. In those 20 years, I've seen koalas pretty regularly. I know that they use this area. I'm concerned, that I'm seeing more vehicle strikes, all that type of stuff. It might not be expert evidence, but it's your evidence, and it's evidence that you can put in your own submission. You might also be able to draw on the work of others. So for example, scientific publications or government documents or data or other work. And this is where you can really bring in some of this information that Jade's been talking to earlier. So you can go into that seed portal and have a look for yourself at what information and data there is available. You can take those screenshots from the website. You can print them out and attach them to your submission. You can write write your findings up in your own submission and put it in to your own submissions to decision makers. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the submission writing process and how to put information before decision makers, we've got a fact sheet that talks about that in a bit more detail, and I've got the link there that you can find that fact sheet. So I'm just going to give a couple of examples before I move on. So the first example is a development application. So we've got Rosie, who learns that there's a new development in her local suburb of Koala Town. She's concerned about the impacts of the development on the local koala population. So she starts off by writing a letter to her local council. Then the proponent submits their development application, and the local government council advertises it and invites people to make a submission. So Rosie lodges a submission, and as part of that, she goes onto the SEED database and onto Bionet, and she has a look there and uses some of that information in her submission. So then the council assesses the development application, and it's required to take into account mandatory relevant considerations, and one of those things might be submissions. So through that process, the council is required to consider the information that Rosie's put in front of it. I'll talk a little bit more about how decision makers use the evidence in a minute. Just continuing on with that example, Rosie then also thinks that maybe the proposal would be a controlled action under the Federal Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, because koalas are listed under the Federal Act, and she thinks the development might have a significant impact on koalas. So separately, she writes to the Federal Minister, setting out her concerns, and requests that the Minister ask the proponent to refer the matter into them for consideration. And in that letter to the Federal Minister, she might reiterate that information that she found on the SEED database. And just one more example, this is a rezoning proposal. So Acme Proprietary Limited is seeking to rezone land in Koala Town, and the local Koala Town Conservation Society is concerned that the subject land contains koala habitat and is part of an important koala corridor. They can go into the SEED portal and they can see where the sightings are, that they can see koalas on the site, and they can do that zoom out that Jade did and kind of could see where koalas were tracking in the landscape. The society thinks it might be useful for them to commission their own expert report. So they pass the hat around, raise a bit of money, or ask a local ecologist to do it for free, and an expert prepares a report for them. That expert might even go on site and do some of its own surveys, and the group can include that in their submission. So the rezoning proposal is then put on public exhibition. The Conservation Society puts in a submission and attaches that expert report. The matter gets a lot of traction, and it's put on the agenda for the upcoming council meeting. And so the Koala Town Conservation Society makes a request to address council at the meeting. So through those two case studies, you can see that there's a number of different points in the process where the community can get information before decision makers. It can put forward whatever information it likes, and using the tools that Jade's shown you today is a good way at, getting official data. As Jade points out, it's not always perfect, but it's hard for government to ignore its own data, and putting that information in front of them. Now, I know you're probably asking, well, shouldn't government be aware of that information, seeing it's its own data? You'd probably think yes, but, sometimes they miss things, or things don't get put in front of them. So I'd just say, just the more information you can get in front of them, the better. Don't expect that, that they will necessarily have that information on hand. So just finishing off, so how is that information used once it's before government? You know, what kind of weight does it have and how can it influence a decision? Well, you won't be surprised to hear my disclaimer: when, how, and to what extent it can be used will depend on the individual circumstances. But just generally, the law requires that a decision maker takes into account all relevant information, excludes irrelevant information, and reaches a conclusion that on the weight of the evidence is reasonable in the circumstances. That's kind of it in a nutshell. I'll talk a little bit about mandatory considerations and irrelevant considerations. So mandatory considerations are those that are explicitly set out in the law, and they might be really specific, like the decision maker must consider relevant environmental planning instruments like the local environment plan, or they must consider the biodiversity development assessment report that accompanies the application. Or it might be that they're required to consider formal submissions. Or the mandatory relevant considerations might be quite general. So they just need to consider the likely impacts of the development or the public interest or the economic social matters. And mandatory relevant considerations can also be implied from the subject, scope, or purpose of the relevant legislation. But you need to also remember that decision makers, they can't take into account anything that's irrelevant. It's unlikely that, you know, if you're seeing that there's koalas in the area, that information will be irrelevant, but just something to note that they're not meant to consider those things. And then what about weighing up that information and making the decisions? So again, it will depend on the individual circumstances. So where there are multiple mandatory considerations, the law may prescribe how they are to be weighted, or it might leave the decision maker with discretion to weight them. So example, a piece of legislation might say, this is the primary thing the decision maker needs to consider, and then it can consider these other things. And so you would expect them to give more weight to that primary thing. But unfortunately, in most of our environment and planning laws here in New South Wales, the law's not that prescriptive, and the decision maker has a lot of discretion in weighing up things. And so you've got them trying to weigh up the environmental impacts, including the koala impacts, of the social, economic impacts, and other impacts. So there's quite a lot of discretion in our laws. And similarly, in terms of exercising their power to make a decision, sometimes the law might give them quite a bit of guidance or mandate how they're meant to make a decision, and other times it can be quite discretionary. So an example of a mandatory kind of decision would be in the context of criminal law, where there's mandatory sentencing. So a judge might find someone guilty, and the law says, you know, if you're found guilty, you get X years in prison. And there's no discretion there. That's what the sentence that they have to be given. Whereas discretionary decision making leaves it up to the decision maker to determine the penalty that person might receive. So in terms of environment law in New South Wales, in most cases, the decision making is still quite discretionary. So the decision maker has a lot of ability to decide whether or not to approve something and weigh up those decisions. And the last thing I would just say is that in making any decision makers are generally required to exercise procedural fairness and make reasonable decisions. There's a lot more I can say about that, but that's probably not something we want to get into in the discussion today. So if you want to have a bit more of a deep dive into those actual processes, so the process about development applications or the process around rezoning or tree clearing, we want to have a little bit more of a look at submission writing, or you want to know about, you know, challenging decisions in the court, we've got some more detailed fact sheets that I've linked here as well, and they're available on our website, and you should be able to get them through Sydney Koala Basin Network as well. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to pass it back to Jade now. Hopefully we've got time for some questions to either Jade or I think.
Yeah, thank you, Cerin, for a really wonderful overview of that. Oh, we've got Catherine.
Sorry, again. Thank you, Cerin. That was really informative and terrific. So I was just wondering, I just discovered yesterday that a project that we've been looking at, an underpass, a koala underpass, it's been such a nightmare dealing with Transport New South Wales there. And they have, when I went to see it yesterday, they've done things that were completely not in the consultant's report for that project. And, you know, they put in koala furniture in the underpass, but Defence has actually put up a fence that stops koalas accessing that underpass. It's kind of crazy dealing with between Transport and the Federal Department of Defence, especially when Transport ignored their recommendations in their consultants report. I'm hoping that politicians will step in and take action here, but you know, if that doesn't occur, what possible actions do we have from now on? You know, Transport have ignored the recommendations of their own consultants. They've been dragging their heels on this for 5 years now. And this latest fiasco with the report has been, you know, dragging on for a year or 2 years.
Thanks, Catherine. It sounds like a very specific example, and I don't know the background to it, so I probably can't answer your question today. If you've got concerns, feel free to reach out to EDO directly. I guess I would say, yes, try the politicians. I don't know, you know, their ability to step in might be limited. It sounds like there's been approval given. If that's the case, you know, there might only be so much that they can do, but definitely community pressure and jumping up and down and raising concerns with politicians is something that, you know, might help in this case. The other thing is, if you feel like they're acting in breach of their, you know, their approval, then, you know, reporting it to the relevant agency that's responsible for enforcing the approval is another thing. I don't know if you've looked down that avenue yet, but, you know, it might seem like they don't take action, but if you keep reporting them and they keep hearing from multiple people that there's concerns about the way that the proposal's being carried out, then it might, you know, force them to take a closer look than they might otherwise.
Thanks so much.
Sue has a question about advertising of DAs and where they need to be advertised. I believe in the Campbelltown area, the process changed a bit. But do you have any comments on that, Cerin or Jade?
It's a good question. I haven't looked at the rules for a while, and I think they've changed. But you would be able to find out. It'll say somewhere where it needs to be advertised. I'm just a bit rusty on where that is. So you could look in the EP&A Act or the regulations, or the council's own community engagement plan might be the place to find the information these days. If you give me a bit more information offline, so I might be able to look it up for you. But again, it goes back to it depends on the individual circumstances. So I'd need to actually go in and look myself, because off the top of my head, I can't remember, and they're different every time.
And
Yeah,
then, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, would they be different from council to council?
That was my question too.
Yeah, look, I can't remember. You're testing me now. I have a feeling that councils can put some of the detail in their community engagement plans, and so that might be different between council and between councils. I can't remember what's left in the Act and what's in the community engagement plans, so I'd need to go and have a look.
Okay, and Brian has a question, which I'd love to know if you have an answer to, which is, what is the current status of the New South Wales Koala SEP?
Yeah, good question, Brian. So at the moment, we've still got Koala SEP 2020 and Koala SEP 2021. I don't know if anyone was following the Koala Wars and how that all eventuated. I've got a couple of blogs up on the EDO website. If you want to go back and look kind of how we got into that point, I can send the links through. Those SEPs are now they've been merged into a new SEP. It's called the State Environmental Planning Policy in brackets Biodiversity and Conservation 2021. And Koala SEP 2020 is chapter 3 and Koala SEP 2021 is chapter 4 from memory. So that's the current status. They both exist, and they're now sitting in the Biodiversity and Conservation SEP. Hope that answers that question.
Well, what does that do about decisions? I don't know whether the New South Wales new government is reviewing this, but what does that mean? I mean, it's got this, obviously, like 2 pillars of a koala SEP. almost simultaneously enshrined. And where does that lead anyone in terms of challenging or requiring something to be done?
So the two SEPs apply to different areas of land. I think you're testing me again, the 2020 SEP I think applies to certain rural areas, and the 21 applies to other areas. So you wouldn't have a situation where both would apply at the same time. You're either in one or in the other. But what that means is you've got, inconsistent and illogical, distinction between that. We did a report for the Sydney Basin Koala Network earlier in this year about law reform that's needed to help koalas, and we looked at this particular issue about the SEPs, and basically said, it seems ridiculous that you've got these two different things that are basically the result of a political war. That's not going to help koalas. And what the new government probably needs to do is jump back in and have a look at it and just create one single SEP that's uniform everywhere and is actually stronger than what we've got and protects koalas. And so there's some really specific recommendations about what they need to do in terms of fixing that anomaly up. So Stephanie, can you include that report in the materials that are going around to everyone, so that they can have a look there at what we've said around the koala SEP?
Just one final comment that's very important, because it appears that the announcement of the Koala National Park in George's River Basin and all that, the rest of the corridors down through App and Wilton seem to just have fallen off, even though we have a Walker Court Appin development, which is subject to the Cumberland Plain being approved. So there's a hell of a lot of uncertainty around this, and we can't get any real clarity. I'm going to go on the seed thing and have a look to see what the latest sightings are, but that's about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. There is a lot of uncertainty, especially too with the CPCP still waiting for federal approval and this, that, and the other. We're working on a separate fact sheet on the CPCP, which will hopefully provide a bit more light. Hoping to have that finished for the Sydney Basin Koala Network soon, so that will be available to you all as well. But I agree. I think there's still a lot of things that are that is uncertain, and I think, telling the new government that it really needs to resolve some of these, outstanding issues or legacy issues that have remained unresolved is really important.
Okay.
I had on that as well. We've spoken to both Wingecarribee and Wallandilly councils, and both of them mentioned that they're kind of ready to go with a koala plan of management, but waiting on a guideline to be resolved. Do you know anything about that guideline, Cerin?
From memory, I think it was the intention that there would be a guideline going with the koala SEP, and I don't think that that's been finalised yet. So I think that might be what they're talking about, and that was one of our recommendations, is that, we're all anticipating this guideline to come out to help people use the SEP, but it hasn't come out yet.
Oh, I'm just I know we could all sit and talk about this all afternoon. I'm just flagging that it's 2 p.m. and I know some people probably have to get back to work and things. I can see someone's hand up and there's another question come through on the chat. I might just do a quick wrap up. So yeah, thank you so much to Cerin for sharing all those expertise. I think the main thing I took away from that was that don't assume decision makers have this information. And if we put it in front of them, it's harder for them to ignore it. So get as much information in front of them as you can. And if you do have specific legal questions, please use the EDO hotline on their website. That will also be in the follow-up materials. I'm hoping that you got out of this webinar a few extra tools to put in your koala advocacy toolkit. If you are concerned about something happening to koalas in the Sydney Basin, please reach out to Sydney Basin Koala Network. Stephanie and I are here. We want to hear about it and provide support where we can. And finally, I just want to say thank you all for coming, for taking time out of your day to be here. If you